Greetings and welcome to this episode of Geeks First. Today, we open my favorite set, Arcane of the Rising. All that and more, stay tuned. Alright, welcome back. Thank you for tuning in. This is video number 2 in the magic that is Flesh and Blood, the Unlimited Legacy. Today we're going to be cracking open the second set of Flesh and Blood, Arcane Rising. In my opinion, one of the most, if not the most, exciting set, maybe up until Dynasty, for obvious reasons. This set here pretty much holds a special place in my heart. Now, let's go ahead and crack this open and begin to discuss why Arcane Rising might single-handedly be the best unlimited set that was ever printed. Now, I do want to point out that this one is made in Belgium. So, that's pretty sweet, because for those of you that collect everything, you might know that some of their boxes were printed in Japan, and some of them were printed in Belgium. Go to the Collector Center to find out more. But inside of this, we're going to go ahead and get right to it. All 24 of these magical, purple, awesome packs. Alright. So let's talk about Flesh and Blood, Arcane Rising, Unlimited. As we crack the first pack here, these, in my opinion, are some of the most cool, interesting, unique artwork variations that Flesh and Blood has ever created. Now, what's interesting about Arcane Rising, which is the second set in Flesh and Blood, is that 4 new heroes were introduced. Runeblade, Wizard, Ranger, and Mechanologist. Because of this fact, the first box technically is incompatible with the second box, which is Arcane Rising, with the exception of generic cards, such as this action card, because in order to play, you must have cards that meet your class requirements or generic. In the case of releasing new classes, what that basically means is that if you were to be collecting various boxes, again, in the unlimited print runs, it essentially means that overall, most of this set is incompatible with the first set. Now, this was a very interesting revelation when most people recognize this, because buying an unlimited pack of Arcane Rising meant that you would hopefully combine certain cards, like Chains of Eminence here, to generic, in order to put it inside of your current deck that you would have had, like from WTR in one of your maybe Warrior decks or Brute decks, or even, Guardian, or even your Ninja deck. But because most of the cards in this set were completely different class, a vast majority of cards were instantaneously not useful for people trying to run in the very first set. This was something that it took a while for most people to understand, and that caused a little bit of interesting kind of dilemma. Ooh, a foil Endless Arrow. Look at that, sir. I know you like to be a Ranger player, so that's got to be a pretty stellar card for you. I'm impressed. Gosh, look at that. I'm a mech player mostly, but that's one of the reasons I enjoy this particular set, is it introduced my favorite class. But, that said, why is Unlimited, or the Unlimited Saga, good for the game of Flesh and Blood? Well, when it came to Arcane Rising, one of the most interesting things is that it was so hard. Red Fate Foreseen, good staple card. Cards like Red Fate Foreseen, as an example, that were only available in the first print run for players that did not necessarily get in at the very beginning. It made it very, very hard to track those cards down in order for you to get them unless an unlimited run was produced. Now, I know that you could always argue the fact that unlimited may have caused anxiety for the people who are collectors, but there has to be a player portion of the trifecta. Investors, collectors, and players. I know it sounds really weird, but if you have a healthy mix of all three, or even players are both collectors and possibly slight investors, then it makes the game function a little bit better, because now there's an ecosystem in which people have their cards remain some value. Unlimited product, which for the most part was fairly readily available. Of the unlimited products we will talk about on this series of Unlimited, Arcane Rising by far seemed to be the #1 hardest to get box, and technically, as of the filming of this, is still considered the, I believe, most expensive of the unlimited boxes that you could purchase on the market. So between the multiple options that are available, Arcane Rising has held the highest value. Now, whether you argue that that's because of a certain couple of legendaries that are more playable, or a certain class has become more popular than another, you can pretty much pick any of those as valid reasons for why, as an example, this set held up better. But I also think it was pre-super hype. And as we discuss the hype of Flesh and Blood, especially as we get into some of the later sets, this possibly, or most likely, because there is no confirmation yet, because the Collector Center hasn't updated, was not printed near as much, and from talking to multiple local game store owners, sounds as if this was not available from distribution. Ooh, that's cute. Look at that. Nice no ruin hood. That's awesome looking. It probably wasn't available near as long, and the amount of stores that had access to get the option of purchasing this unlimited, because again, this is kind of pre-major explosionary drive, this particular box just held up better. Now, unlimited also provides a very interesting component because, again, as I mentioned in the first one, and I will probably be repeating for the remainder of the other sets as we go forward, you have to have something to draft from. If you don't have something to draft, then it's really hard to play the game. And in order to grow the game, you have to play the game. Unlimited obviously was the solution to that. And even though the cards in Unlimited, because they are the exact same as first edition, basically in this particular set, the likelihood of you grabbing some sort of crazy valuable card out of Arcane Rising was actually, I believe, a tad bit higher than in WTR, such as Induction Chamber, a Dash staple at this point, and a very nice card overall. That's just awesome. That foiling on Reverberate is just amazing. But it really kind of just boils down to, again, personal preference. Maybe you don't like Mechanologist, maybe you don't like Wizard, maybe you don't like Rune Blades. Obviously, the power level per each character is a little different. But the reason that this series I want to have documented is because at this point, Flesh and Blood has moved on from the concept that there is an Unlimited and a First Edition. And that's, I think, an important leap, even though at first it was taken with, I would almost say, disdain from some of the hardcore individuals, because It's one of those situations where no matter how you skin that cat, you question whether or not your cards will remain valuable, or if nothing else, you'll want to put money into something and not see that it just erodes away. The good news is that Flesh and Blood, for the most part, especially unlike other games such as Magic or even Pokemon, common cards still are quite valuable in regards to playability. Not necessarily from a monetary perspective, but common cards like even Fate Foreseen or equipment cards can basically make your deck all the better. A lot of good wizard cards and good mechanologist cards, as an example from this set, came in the form of commons. Now, obviously, super rares, which this is the last set to include super rares. So there's our cracked bauble. Cha-ching! Love it. We have a blue Fate Foreseen, and the key Fate Foreseen that most people look for is the red Fate Foreseen, just because it's mostly what people tend to play in some of the more competitive decks for a myriad of reasons. But a good example of cards that don't necessarily need to be very rare to do a lot is like a 0 to 60 for a mechanologist. This common card is a super great card. Now, since I didn't play much Runeblade, I'm sure there are several Runeblade cards that are probably very, useful that are in the common slot. I just don't know what they are. This must be the second cracked bauble of the box. That was pretty close back to back. Kind of interesting. Other cards that I like to look for, especially as you're going through packs, are the equipment that you hit, and especially if you're trying to draft the sets, you can always see some very interesting and unique things. Zap as a good example of a wizard card that I really enjoy. Ridge Rider Shot. Again, I'm more drawn toward the mechanologist cards, but ranger cards and wizard cards are all strewn throughout this set and have wide variety of uses. But back on the unlimited component. When Flesh and Blood did opt at this stage to say, well, there's a lot of people that want these cards and there's not a lot of products. Art of War, congrats, sir, look at that. That's a great one. Hot dang. It boils down to there were a lot of people that were wanting to get some of these, and it's not necessarily something that was easy to get a hold of. I know, for example, in my general locale, that it was almost impossible for me to find a Arcane Rising box anywhere. This also includes, up until, basically they released it, and then kind of the local stores that are around me, not a single one of them really carried it. So the likelihood of me finding any Arcane Rising locally for me to support those game stores just didn't really exist, and it kind of sucked. I felt bad that I couldn't grab the set that I wanted to grab, and whether that's because the stores were not actually purchasing product at that time, the game was a little bit newer, it was risky, whatever reason, obviously the game has proven itself and has legs. We're now approaching the 8th set, which is great. And this being the second set, obviously, it's going to be hard for anybody to, as an owner say, okay, I'm willing to park a bunch of funds into this. And Ninth Blade of the Blood Oath. Park a bunch of money into it and basically not know what's going to happen. It's just like, other Kickstarter games and things like that. Now, obviously, Flesh and Blood did a lot of marketing and has now kind of a larger base, but in the early times, I could imagine it being a very hard sale to a game store, especially when that game store is looking at their bottom line saying, okay, if I put money into this, how do I know it's going to sell, versus going with a known evil of, saying, okay, buy a Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever, and knowing that that's going to fly off the shelf. Red Fate Foreseen, a great card. Now, back on topic with Unlimited here. even though there are a myriad of choices that obviously led the company to kind of follow the original Pokemon style of first edition and unlimited, it basically boils down to the decision for Legend Story Studios to jump and make that leap of faith to say they recognize that the unlimited and first edition model wasn't working. And it wasn't until a later set that that became abundantly clear why that possibly wasn't working. And it was like lightning in a bottle, or forked lightning, that some of the situations in the early time arose. But overall, Unlimited does serve a purpose. And this series is here to inform you that you shouldn't not look at Unlimited. Especially as a player, or even somebody who wants to get into the game, finding cards, especially like this, and hopefully in the later sets, as an example, how they have reprinted Arcane Rising, WTR, and Crucible of War into History Pack 1, there will similarly be a History Pack 2 for the later sets that come after this. What's really exciting about that is that even though these cards are black border, and like the Chronicles Age of Magic the Gathering, where they reprinted the cards so that you can still get access to them, but inside of white border, Unlimited, while short-lived, technically, is still very amazing. As in, I would still prefer to buy this because I can draft it with my friends, I can play with it, I can sit down and enjoy, and I don't necessarily have to worry about whether or not it's monetarily the good or bad decision, so to speak, as far as us being able to play with these cards. Now, as we near the last two packs here, look at that one. That one's already kind of open. Woohoo! The point I want to point out is Arcane Rising and any Unlimited set in Flesh and Blood, which will be echoed as we continue to go through this opening. All of these cards are now in the game, and because the game is non-rotating, these cards will, at some point, have their day to shine. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, it may be years down the road, but all of the cards that are printed in this set, and any subsequent set, may or may not jump up in price and or become hard to get, which means that the original version of that card, as Flesh and Blood would always say, is going to be the most special and interesting version of that card compared to reprints, which will have less flashy versions. As we round out this last pack here, a big shout out and thanks to Mr. Tim for, oh, Mortar Tide, there we go, majestic, nice, for us opening this box for him as we continue this journey of interesting cards in the historical significance of Unlimited in the Flesh and Blood game. It's one of those things where no matter how you look at this, Flesh and Blood will continue to evolve, and because Flesh and Blood is evolving, it means that players can enjoy Flesh and Blood in their own unique way. And that means that overall, you should have faith that Unlimited is not only here to stay, but even though it no longer is a product in Flesh and Blood 2.0, the Unlimited legacy basically means these cards are now an era of a bygone, or relic of a bygone era? It's probably the better word to it. But until they find a new way to go forward and say Flesh and Blood 2.0, this is what you're going to find to grab cards for the classes that you need if you want to play those classes in Flesh and Blood. So thanks for staying tuned for this video. It's been a quick one, but next up will be Crucible of War, and there'll be some fun, interesting stuff to talk about with that. So until next time, peace out, and have a good one.